There's kind of a change of mindset that we need to have out there. A lot of times I think we have taken the approach that we need to change the existing paradigm. I want to challenge that notion today, that instead of doing that, actually what we need to do is create a new paradigm and render the old one obsolete. And what Dr. Pesta is going to be talking about today is really doing that. And there is a crisis in education. I've seen it over the last decade or so. I've seen it with some of the younger legislators that have come in. And it's really easy for us to say, you know, those millennials, man. You know something though, but it's our responsibility. A lot of people say the World War II generation is the greatest generation. I say that's true except for one thing. They forgot to pass on what they learned to the next generation, in large part. We can't make that same mistake. We need to pass on to the next generation freedom. There's also this idea with millennials that they're a bunch of lost kids that they don't care. They just want to sit and play video games all day long and smoke pot, right? Well, that's not true. It's not true. They actually are hungry for the truth. They're out there on the internet and they know something's wrong. They just can't put their finger on it. And they want to find out the truth. And I'm talking from young middle schoolers all the way through high school. They want to find the truth. Why don't we be there to give them the truth? And it's not just for our own family members. Some of you are thinking, Matt, you don't know my son. Oh man, my daughter. Look, it doesn't have to be your own family members. It could be your nieces and nephews. It can also be your friends and neighbors. And it's important not to just take what you learned today and just kind of hold it to yourself, but share it with everybody out there, because I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of people out there that say, I can't homeschool because it's too expensive. It's really never really the issue of being too expensive. Or they say, you know, I don't have the time. Or they say, I'm just a high school educated mom or a high school educated dad. What do I know, or what can I give? This program solves all those problems and does something very important, puts the parents back at the center of the education of the child, especially on worldview. And that is important, because right now, indoctrination is changing a generation, and we can't let that happen. So thank you very much for being here today on a Saturday, and it is my great pleasure and my great honor to introduce the Academic Director for Freedom Project Education, my good friend, Dr. Duke Pesta. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Clear? Good. Well, we're going to do two things today. We're going to talk about what's wrong with American public education. We're going to spend a little bit more time on that than we did yesterday, because this was the open to the public meeting. So I want to make sure you understand what's wrong. What Matt said is exactly right. You cannot fix public schools. They're too monolithic. They are too controlled by unions. They are too political. They are too dependent on federal money. I'm going to show you why. By the time we're done, I think you're going to see why Matt's exactly right. You cannot fix the existing paradigm. If what you want for your kids and grandkids is an education that will prepare them for life, will prepare them to have careers, will prepare them to be entrepreneurs, will prepare them to take care of their family and their community, you can't leave them in those schools. And we're going to show you that moving forward. And with the time that I have left, once I'm done, I'm going to have to do a quick little switch of my PowerPoints. And I want to talk to you a little bit about one possible solution, which is our school, Freedom Project Academy. My primary job for the last 25 years has been to be a university professor. I'm a tenured professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. And I have taught high-level English classes. I've taught at 7 different universities. I've taught graduate programs, big major schools like Purdue University, Oklahoma State, small liberal arts colleges, and I'm now at the University of Wisconsin. I got involved with these issues because I was beginning to see 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, kids coming to my university who could not read very well, who could not read complicated things, who could not speak or do math very well. I'll give you an example. My junior and senior English majors at the University of Wisconsin, kids are very close to graduating with a college degree that they spent about $100,000 on. These kids have about a 9th grade reading level. That's about it. Freshmen in high school. Our kids are doing math at a very, very low level, all across the country. And why? I asked myself, why is this happening? And the obvious answer is because the middle and high school and elementary schools aren't preparing our kids. So about 8 years ago, I decided to try to find out what was going on in the public schools that was making a college education. Really, we're just giving kids a high school education 40 years ago. For all that money kids are spending, they're graduating from college, hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases in debt, and they know basically what a high school kid would have known in 1970. It's amazing. How did we get here? I'm going to show you how we got here. First problem we have. Remember this guy, Jonathan Gruber? He was one of the architects of Obamacare. Personally made about $4 million helping to craft the national health care law. He is not a doctor, has no medical experience. He's simply an economist who works at MIT University. He now has been indicted, by the way, for bilking the federal government of money. But nonetheless, he got the Obamacare program in. Here's what he said in 2014, after Obamacare was put in place so that it would be very difficult to remove it.
If you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay? Just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass.
Call it the stupidity of the American voter. If we had told you what Obamacare was, you wouldn't want it. If we had let you vote for it, you wouldn't have voted for socialized health care. So, as Nancy Pelosi said, right, you'll know what's in it after we pass it. And that's exactly what they did. Lack of transparency. We can only do our big socialist things in this country by not letting you know we're doing them, by not sharing them with you. And you can say what you will about Obamacare, socialized medicine, as bad as that was and is. What they did with Common Core, how they took over our schools, is much worse. Obamacare was a model of transparent government compared to how they put the federal government into your schools. Obamacare had hearings at the House and the Senate, the Supreme Court. Right? Obamacare was on C-SPAN. They were discussing it before it was passed. None of that happened. Your Washington State teachers went home one mid-June morning for summer break 7 years ago. They came back in fall, and all the textbooks had been removed. All the pedagogy had been removed. Everything had been subordinated to new standardized federal tests controlled by the federal government. Common Core was in place. None of them were trained in it. None of them were asked about it. Teachers didn't write Common Core. The teachers' unions had nothing to do with Common Core. It was the federal government. And the whole system has changed. I don't know if you saw in the news just last week. Just last week, the NAEP scores were released, the NAEP scores. This is the organization that measures our students' achievement from year to year. It's a government test, basically. Government response. Came out that just last week that only 35% of American school kids, 8th graders, are grade proficient in math. 35% of 8th grade kids can do math at an 8th grade level. Only 37% of 8th grade kids can do English at an 8th grade level. And in the big cities, Chicago, it's 12%, only 12%. In Milwaukee, it's 18%. In Detroit, Michigan, only 5% of our public school kids can read and write at grade level. It's gotten worse, not better under Common Core, much worse. But here's the thing about Common Core. What's its purpose? If it's not an educational program, what is it? It's a sociological one. And so 20 years ago, you'd have the grades for our kids would differ from different parts of the country, right? Countries, states that spent more time on education, states that had better teachers or better learning models, those kids would be doing higher. And states that didn't commit much to education, they tended to have lower performance. But it was based on state willingness and local control. Ever since they put Common Core in, what they did is they decided we are going to level off education. We're going to make it common, which means we can't do much to raise the low-performing kids. We've been trying for 100 years. We've been trying to raise the lowest performing kids since they opened the first schoolhouse however many thousands of years ago, right? But the federal government decided, and this is what we call social justice education. The federal government decided that we can't pull all the kids up, but what you can do is you can hold the high-achieving kids down. And it is remarkable when you think about the average for the country now. 35% of kids can't do math at their grade level. Only 35% can do. And only 37% of kids can read it. That's nationwide. Doesn't matter what school district you're in. In the wealthiest school districts, that's more or less true now as well. So what they have done in their social justice education, and I tell you from the outset, social justice is just another code word for socialism. Because what is it? It's outcome-based education, right? It's you're not meeting the kids where they are. You're not allowing teachers to figure out what the kid sitting in front of them needs. Because all kids are different. This is the attitude, the regularized, centralized, federalized, socialist attitude that it doesn't matter where a kid starts. The socialist system will process them, and they all come out the same. If you're going to get 60 million American school kids to exactly the same place, by law, by definition, it has to be a lower place, right? Every time you raise standards, kids fall off of them. The one standard that fits everybody is a low. That's why when you think about socialist economies, it's not that everybody's rich and equal. It's that everybody, except the ruling class, right? Everybody is poor and equal. And that's the thing. And that's what we call it. You could call it, in the churches, the Christian churches, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, it was known as liberation theology, right? Marxism applied to theology. And we've got a pope now who, by the way, was schooled in the fever swamps of Marxist ideology in South America. Are we surprised that this pope went to Cuba about a year and a half ago and stood next to the Castro brothers? Hey, be clear about this. The more Roman Catholics have been murdered by the Castro brothers in the last 25 years than anything else. And yet the Pope, Pope Francis, stood between the two Castro brothers. Right behind them in Revolutionary Square was a big picture of Che Guevara. And the Pope used that platform, standing between those two murderers of Catholics, to lecture America about its capitalist system. Not a single word of criticism for the two thugs who murdered at least 1.5 million Catholics in the last 40 years. That's what happens when social justice theory gets into the churches. We all know economically with nationalized health care, the Obama administration, right? And here's the problem. The Obama administration was committed to many socialist programs. But what came before it, whether it was the Bush administration or the Clinton administration, not much difference, is there, in terms of the debt and the spending and all the other things. And so what we're going to talk about today is that socialist mindset applied to kids. And so I'll ask you, raise your hand if your kids or grandkids are Common. 701 talks on Common Core, right? Your kids aren't Common. Raise your hand if your kids are Standard. But they're not, see? Every kid is made different. The old paradigm under which we educated children was individually based, right? We let teachers have the freedom to figure out things. We tried to respond. It didn't bother us that my kid was really good at English, but he was bad at math. You try to get his math grades up, but not everyone's going to be an accountant, right? That kids are different. We've lost more gifted and talented education programs in the last 2 years. We're killing opportunities for kids to jump ahead. We've lost more in the last 2 years than in the previous 50 years combined. There will be no place for high achievers. My case is kind of illustrative. When I was in 3rd grade, I was doing 2nd grade math. All these years later, I'm still kind of doing 2nd grade math. I was smart, though. I married a girl who's very good in math. She does the math. She pays the bills, right? But while I was doing 2nd grade math in 3rd grade, I had a 12th grade reading level. And what they did is they let me read 12th grade books, right? Well, and maybe that's why I entered the high finance world of college English professor. Nevertheless, I got a basic enough education in everything. But the thing that I was allowed to do well, I was allowed to do well. Now they've cut those programs out entirely. Can you imagine what my life would have been like, and possibly my career arc, if in 3rd grade I was only allowed to read what the 3rd graders were reading? Imagine if you're a 3rd grade kid who's capable of doing 11th grade math, and they lock you in to doing the stupid 3rd grade math the Common Core way. And why do they do it? So that the kids like me who couldn't do math don't get traumatized. See, it's not fair that I'm doing 3rd grade math while the kid sitting next to me is doing 9th grade math. That's socially unjust. If you understand that, I don't even necessarily need to show you the examples. I'm going to show them to you anyway. That's what I'm here for. I would like to point out a couple of things that I didn't get to point out yesterday. If you think Common Core is the problem, you're partially right. With all due respect, the problem is American government schools. There's a reason your founding fathers made no provision whatsoever for government schools. The founding fathers understood discreetly that if the state ever was to become the primary agent of education for your kids, then the state would educate kids for its benefit, not for yours. not for your local communities, not for your religious traditions. It would have no regard for your families. You would become, education would be used to make you wards of the state. Common Core reminds us just how successful now the federal program of education has become. In fact, if you go all the way back, we didn't get an American public school system till the 1850s. 70, 80 years after the founding of the country, we finally got one. And who is the man that gave it to us? Horace Mann. You will find a statue, a school named after Horace Mann in all 50 states of this union. Horace Mann, when he put together American public schools, he put them together not to educate your kids better. He made that very clear. He put American public schools together to make your kids subservient to the state. When he was looking for a model around the world on which to base American government schools, Horace Mann chose the authoritarian Prussian system. You may recall that Prussia was a region of Germany in the 19th century. Otto von Bismarck, for about 80 years they became quite powerful, shaped a lot of European politics. But the Prussian school of education, which by the way gave rise to the Nazi school of education 70 years after that, the Prussian school of education was where the children were taken from their parents at very young ages. They were put in public boarding schools. They were taught, they were given their health care, they were fed completely, clothed and housed by the government, the central government, where they were indoctrinated and turned into good little military wards of the state. That's the model that Horace Mann picked for this country. In fact, here, after Horace Mann got the American public schools in place, here's what he said about them. After a child has arrived at the legal age for attending school, whether the child of noble or of peasant, the only two absolute grounds of exemption from attendance are sickness and death. We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause. As early as the middle of the 1850s, the founder of American public schools saw your families and your kids as hostages to their paradigm, their worldview, and their experiments. The second most important figure in the history of public education is John Dewey. John Dewey, who is an interesting man. A lot of controversy surrounds him, a philosopher, an educator, most known perhaps for his educational contributions. John Dewey wasn't a pretend communist. He was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. John Dewey flew to the Soviet Union in the early after 1917 to congratulate and learn from Vladimir Lenin himself. It was Lenin who said to John Dewey that let the West have its parliaments, its houses of Congress. Give us the elementary schools. John Dewey never forgot the lesson. Here's what John Dewey, many quotes. And by the way, I've got lots of quotes from all these guys if you'd like to see them. When this talk is done, come and get a business card from me. If you want these slides, I'll send them to you for free. I'll just mail them to you. So you can have all this information. Double check me, fact check me, take it for your own. Spread it around, do what you want to do. So I've got more quotes, but here's one, a particularly interesting one from John Dewey. John Dewey said in the early 1930s, by the way, exactly the same time that Hitler's Jugend, the Hitler Youth, right, were ratcheting up in Nazi Germany, 1935, 36, 37. It's exactly the same time that John Dewey said the following. He said, and I quote, "Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone will be interdependent. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective." Common Core is the collective, isn't it? No Child Left Behind, which preceded Common Core, was the first inklings of the collective. It is the turning education into a common achievement, not an individual one. Using education to snip off differences. One of my favorite stories about this is there was a great dictator, a tyrant of Syracuse in the ancient world. And a man came all the way across the Mediterranean. This is 2,000 years before Christ. And a man came across the Mediterranean and wanted to know how in his little island he could become an effective dictator. Of course, the Greeks invented the word dictator. And so rather than answer him, this tyrant of Syracuse, he took him out into the wheat fields, those rolling wheat fields of Sicily. And he had a cane, a sharp cane. And as he walked around the wheat fields, he started to nick off the top of any blade of wheat, grass of wheat, that grew higher than its peers. Any blade of grass that grew higher, he snipped the head off it until all that section of wheat was the same height. And he turned to his friend and he said, and that's how you do it. Anyone who seems to be better, anyone who seems to be stronger, anyone who seems to be smarter, you cut the head off. And you enforce radical conformity. Make them all, the tyrant of Syracuse even used the word, make them all common, he said. And that's why I asked you about the commonness of your kids. If we have homeschool moms and dads here, we've got teachers here. You tell me if I'm wrong about this. You can't teach the same kid, two kids the same way. Even your own kids in your family. Your sons and your daughters have to be taught differently. Your oldest son and your youngest son, they're not necessarily the same kid. And what American education worked very well when American everything worked very well when we treated you and your kids like individuals, not like part of some greater group. When we taught kids as individuals, let me read at a 12th grade level, even if I'm an embarrassment in math. Just because I'm behind in math doesn't mean the way you fix that is to pull me down in English too. But that's the system we now have. The children, critical thinking, right? Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective. Sure they do. How about John D. Rockefeller? Another Nazi sympathizer of the 1930s, big friend. Much of Rockefeller's money was handed over to John Dewey to help manipulate the schools, what was going on in the schools. Here's what John Rockefeller said in 1935. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions, which were intellectual and character development, they will fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we will work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. That word folk means something in the 1930s, doesn't it? That was Hitler's word, the Volke, right? That's what Hitler was talking about, the people, the collective. We don't care, Rockefeller said, about the old way of educating your kids, intellectual development, making your kids as smart as possible, as educated as possible, and character, moral development. We're going to get rid of those two things because they are the problem. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children. We will organize them and teach them to do in a perfect way what their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. We are going to divorce them from their families. We're going to turn them into the citizens that if we leave it to the parents, they will never become. And if you've been watching anything about Common Core, the one thread that you could have picked up by not doing any studying on Common Core is how little power, how little influence moms and dads now have in their kids' schools. You can go up there and talk to the principal. You can go up there and talk to your teacher. They're going to shake their shoulders at you and say, nothing we can do about it. What 30, 40 years ago, when teachers wanted parental involvement, wanted moms and dads to help with the homework, now they're telling teachers, are telling moms and dads, don't help your kids with their homework. Don't leave it alone. You don't know what you're doing. Let us do it. In fact, we really don't need your help at all. John Dunphy, pull it forward, John Dunphy, who was a disciple of John Dewey's, in 1983 became one of the founders of the Humanist Manifesto. The Humanist Manifesto was a doctrine, a dogma, was a signed contract to completely secularize Western culture. Here's what John Dunphy said about American public schools in 1983. I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, between the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism, resplendent with the promise of a world in which the never realized Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will be finally achieved. And we know how socialists, by getting rid of God, getting rid of Christ, we know how they achieved love thy neighbor at the end of a gun, right? And with barbed wire and concentration camps and torture, that's how they did it. And how about the NEA? How about the largest teachers union in the country? And the most powerful political union we have. No union, not even the UAW, no union spends more of its dues on lobbying politically than the NEA does. As early as 1947, after American soldiers had just come home from World War II, helping to make the world safe for democracy, their kids were being put in schools that were countering democracy. Classic example, 1947. Far too many people in America, both in and out of education, look upon the elementary school as a place to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. That was the NEA in 1947. Far too many of you actually think the primary purpose of our elementary schools is to teach our kids how to read and write and think. 1947 that was. 1948. What do we replace critical thinking with? 1948. Education for international understanding. International understanding involves the use of education as a force for conditioning the will of the people. That's what it's about. Education is a force to co-opt, condition, and overwhelm the will of the American people. And by 1969, we know what happened in this country between 1948, the end of World War I, and between 1969, the radicalization of the universities, right? The socialist takeover of our universities. In 1969, here's what the NEA said. Schools will become clinics whose primary purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment for the student. And teachers must become psychosocial therapists. This is what's called under Common Core social and emotional, PSEL education, psychological, social, and emotional learning. This is the major paradigm by which they're teaching your kids in government schools. We are not primarily concerned with academic achievement. We aren't the least bit interested in making your kids philosophers or men of learning or men of science. No. We are going to monitor your kids' sociological reactions. We're going to monitor their attitudes to all sorts of progressive new stimuli. Transgenderism and homosexuality and global warming and introducing socialist models for government. Rewriting the history of America. Psychological, social, and emotional learning. Do you send your kids to get psychological services at the schools? Is the primary purpose of the schools in your eyes to manipulate your kids emotionally? But that's what they're doing. And they're doing it much more than they're doing any kind of education. Even according to their own tests and their own standards. The achievement, explain this Common Core math problem to me, because only Common Core math can make sense of this. 35% of Common Core math, only 35% of American 8th graders can do Common Core math. Only 35%. Plus the 37% that can read at an 8th grade level. And how does that somehow equal dramatic raises for public school teachers who walk out of school in the middle of a school year in protest? Arizona teachers walked out, left the kids in the lurch, got a 20% raise across the board, and these are the results. The results go down every year. The schools demand more and more of your money, and what for? What for? I mean, show me the correlation between money and education. We've been dumping more and more money into the public schools, and the scores have gone down for the last 40 years. And if you have to pay higher property taxes, referendums, right, another 6 or 7% for the schools, well, when they fail your kids, don't you have the right to get your money back? Shouldn't you? I mean, look, I think most of us, if our kids were getting a quality education that prepared them for life in college, entrepreneurship, if they were getting that, still wouldn't be the role of the federal government to take our money for the schools. But we could probably live more with it. But you're getting nothing for your return here. And I mentioned, go look at the big rural areas, the big primarily Democrat-controlled rural areas. The scores are much lower. In Milwaukee, which is just down the road from me, it's 18%. 18% of Milwaukee kids are proficient at age level, grade level. But you see, what I'm suggesting to you is, this is hard to fathom if it's just Common Core. If you came to this because you think that our schools have been just hunky-dory until Common Core, you better think again. I would like you to at least see that from the very origins of American government school, none of these people have anything to say about education. None of these people are the least bit concerned about making your kids the best that they can be in terms of intellect, in terms of career. This is about sociology. This is social engineering. And so we jump to the present. That's Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan was Barack Obama's Secretary of Education for 7.5 of his 8 years. Notice the date, March of 2009. Within the first couple of months of Barack Obama's presidency, here's Arne Duncan talking about the new progressive plan for education under Obama's administration.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
At home, we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. And this is a chance to really create what I think the 21st century school has to look like. This needs to be the norm, not the exception. Time matters tremendously, and all of our families need our doors open longer.
Is this a big ticket item in terms of financial resources?
Finances is a piece of this, and we again have significant financial resources, unprecedented financial resources coming to the table. But let me be clear, this is thinking differently and being creative.
This is thinking differently. We want your public schools open 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the thing that should really make your blood run a little cold, we want this network of government schools from coast to coast on almost every street corner. We want them to be the centers of the community, not the local police office or not the local family home, not the local churches or civic government. No. We want our collection of governmentally localized, centralized schools. And did you hear what he said? At home, Chicago, we've begun building healthcare clinics onto our schools. Didn't we hear about the clinics in 1969? You know, your daughter, your 12-year-old daughter can show up to the public middle school with a couple of Midol once a month, and she can be charged with drug trafficking for possessing those. Yet they're going to start handing out medicine, health care to your kids. One of the reasons they did this, if you read the Obamacare legislation, under Obamacare, American public schools are now authorized to provide birth control for your kids in middle school. And guess what? They don't have to consult you. They can give girls as young as 11, 12, and 13 birth control, including passing out the morning after abortion pill to little girls. And they don't have to notify you. Why are they building clinics now on new schools? Because it's awfully unseemly to take a 12-year-old girl off a middle school campus and take her to a gynecologist. They're putting them on there now in the schools. Do you know think about how many of your kids, our kids, are fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner now at public schools. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, Memphis, Tennessee, huge federal grants to feed kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner all summer long when school's out. Because you know what the premise is, right? If we're feeding them 2 or 3 meals a day for 9 months, we can't trust you. We send them home for you all summer, they're going to starve to death because you're too stupid to feed your kids. What did Jonathan Gruber say, right? Call it the stupidity of the American voter. But if you're letting the schools feed your kids, educate your kids, recreate your kids, because there's always the school, the sports and all the stuff before and after school. If you're allowing them then to build clinics to deal with health care, if you're allowing the schools, without your consent or even your knowledge, to psychologically and socially test your kids, who's the parent here? They are. And you should not be the least bit surprised, since we've handed all that to them without a fight. Oh, that's great. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, we've got families making multiple millions of dollars a year whose kids are still getting free government meals. Because you want to know why? Social justice education. You can't just feed the poor kids. If you do that, you're singling them out. You're traumatizing them. You have to feed all the kids so that the poor kids don't get stigmatized. And that's what's happening on campus after campus after campus. And this has nothing to do with the generosity of the federal government. They're going to feed your kids, house your kids, right? What are they doing here? Provide medical care for your kids? Taking them. That's exactly right.
I think our school should...
Oh, and did you hear about him too, Arnie Duncan? He made him a little faux pas there. He called the schools stores. The moms and dads want our stores, he said, open 24 hours a day. Right? This is a matter of thinking differently, he says. And here's Arnie Duncan. Here's Arnie Duncan on his way out, 1 month before he stepped down in the middle of 2016. Here is Arnie Duncan talking about what his plans, what ideally, if we had been smart enough to elect Hillary Clinton, maybe we would have had already. Listen to what Arnie Duncan said should happen next.
The one idea I threw out that I wanted to sort of road test it with the kids and see what they thought, is the idea of public boarding schools. And that's a little bit of a different idea or a controversial idea. But the question is, do we have some children where there's not a mom, there's not a dad, there's not a grandma, there's just nobody home? And there are certain kids we should have 24/7.
Yep, there you go. Prussia, right? And you think about this for a second. First of all, do we have an epidemic of 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds living alone in brownstones? Do we have that problem here? But let's pretend we do. Let's pretend we have homes where kids are virtually all alone. Do you not have county agencies? Do you not have city agencies? Do you not have state agencies? Do you not have religious and charitable agencies? What in the world do we need a layer of a federal boarding school program? And here's the question. Once that, because it will be eventually built if things don't change. Someone's going to build it. You get that layer of federal of government schools where the government can decide which kids have to be with them. You think it's just going to be for kids who have no parental supervision? What about the parents who teach their kids traditional marital values? How soon will the federal government say, hey, you Bible-believing Christians, we're going to put your kids in these federal, for their own welfare and safety, we're going to put them in public boarding schools. You're telling me you don't want your 12-year-old girl to be sexually experimenting? Put them in the public boarding schools. You voted for who in the last, you've got guns in your house? All right, the unsafety of guns in your house? We got these 16-year-old kids now lecturing America about the evils of the Second Amendment. It doesn't matter if every factual piece of information they state is wrong about guns. It's completely wrong about the Second Amendment. They're the force now, right? For our safety, these young kids are saying, take our parents' guns away. And if your parents won't give them up, and you have a federal boarding school, guess what's going to happen? Right? On the way out, just a couple of years ago, that's Bill Gates. Bill Gates paid about $6 billion to get Common Core textbooks and pedagogy into your school. First question you got to ask yourself is, what qualifications does he have? What do you think? And yeah, he's a college dropout. He didn't need it. What do you think would have happened in this country with, so let's say Common Core was a Republican idea, a Christian idea, a conservative idea, and the evil Koch brothers had spent $7 to $10 billion of their own money to outfit the public schools with brand new curriculum and textbooks. Would it not be on the front page of every newspaper, including the really bad newspapers you have in the state? Would it not be on the front page of them all over the place? Rogue Republicans steal public education. Bill Gates is from here, right? That's why the Washington State Legislature about 5 years ago condemned Common Core. The Democrat, liberally dominated Washington State Legislature a few years ago said that Common Core was developmentally inappropriate and didn't belong in our schools. Oh, it's still here. But the reason the Washington politicians did it, including the Democrats, is primarily because of Bill Gates. He has no qualifications for this. Why are we allowing somebody to use our kids as guinea pigs? And how do you know they're guinea pigs? Well, in this short clip from 2012, Bill Gates tells you we're not even going to know if Common Core works for 10, 12 years. You were told that Common Core is better than what we have, higher standards. No, it never was. Listen to the guy who paid for it.
It would be great if our education stuff worked, but that we won't know for probably a decade.
We're not going to know for 10 years. 2022, 35% literacy rates. You know now it doesn't work. It was never meant to work. And here's Bill Gates, and notice the date. 2009, also in May, right? Within 3 or 4 months of Obama taking, this was not an accident. They have been working on this for decades. Do you really think Obama could have taken office in 2009 and within 3 or 4 months had all of this stuff in place? No, sir, couldn't have happened. But already in May of 2009, here is Bill Gates talking to a group about Common Core. And what he's going to say is going to stagger you. One of the things he's going to tell you is, did you know this? When you were told by the outgoing President Bush, Republican, and the incoming President Obama, Democrat, remember when they told you that unless you cough up billions and billions of taxpayer dollars for stimulus, for banks and car companies, the whole economy is going to collapse? Remember that? Did you know that about $4 billion of the stimulus fund was handed right back to the Department of Education? They taxed you under a false premise, and then they handed much of the money over to Arnie Duncan. This is only 3 or 4 months in. Already, in the first couple of months of the new administration, $350 million had been taken from the stimulus and given to Arnie Duncan to create the tests. The federal Common Core tests were created before they ever wrote a single standard of Common Core, which means that they were testing outcomes. They were taking control of what happened in American schools. Listen to this.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arnie Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests, next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core. When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
When the tests, which were written first, are aligned to the standards, whose sole job is to teach towards the test, curriculum has been hijacked for every American school kid. who's in charge of your kid's education now. And this is the thing. You can complain, Washington, all about it. You talk to congressmen, talk to senators, give poor innocent Matt here a hard time. But you know what? There's nothing, almost nothing Washington can do about it now. Very little you can do about it, because it's all in control of the feds. Did you know, under the ESSA Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act, do you know that under that piece of legislation passed into law December of 2015 by Republicans who controlled the House, the Senate, and the Assembly? Did you know, the House and the Congress, did you know that because of the ESSA Act, the Department of Education Secretary has to approve your state curriculum for the first time in American history? So if you want to put together your own great Washington State curriculum free of Common Core, the Secretary of Education can tell you no. She says, you can do it, we're not going to give you any money. Now, Betsy DeVos isn't going to do that. But what about the next Democrat president and his Secretary of State, Secretary of Ed? That's exactly what Arne Duncan did, right? And it was Republicans. Paul Ryan, Wisconsin. He gave the Republican Congress 16 hours to read an 1,100-page bill before they rammed it through. Now that's the law. This guy, you probably don't know who he is. He's David Coleman. He is the architect of Common Core. He is the man most responsible for the Common Core standards. He is the guy who was in charge of the committee of 5 other people. Basically 6 people wrote the Common Core standards. Despite what you hear about states or governors or teachers, I'll show you momentarily that it was only these people. David Coleman has no educational background whatsoever. He's never taught a class, never taken doesn't have a degree in education. He's never been an educator, never studied educational pedagogy. He was the guy who ran Barack Obama's social media campaign in 2007. He helped get Barack Obama elected by driving millennials primarily on Facebook and other platforms to vote. That's simple as that. That's his whole expertise. He was put in charge of the Common Core education plan without any experience. And the thing that's most remarkable about him is, well, let me convince you first of all that he has no experience.
He has been involved in virtually every step of setting the national standards, and he doesn't have a single credential for it. He's never taught in an elementary school, I think. I actually don't know. He's never edited a scholarly journal, but I think he has written scholarly papers, and a variety of other things that everybody here has done some of. He hasn't done.
You'd think someone with Lauren's experience would understand you never tell the truth when you're introducing someone.
I actually think it's really important to try to base what I'm about to say to you on evidence I share with you rather than on the sands of my qualifications. So if I ask you or talk to you about doing something, it should be evident that it makes sense to you to do, because I have no other authority.
Because I have no other authority. And here's the thing that's so disgusting about this. David Coleman has never been elected to public office. You as the taxpayer who fund these schemes, these educational schemes, you have no control over him. The House, the Senate have no control over him. He is a complete agent that is separate from everything. Obama appointed him, gave him the job without any experience. You want to fire him? How? He's the guy who wrote the standards. Watch this. He has his own, he's the Jonathan Gruber of Common Core. And like Jonathan Gruber, he's made millions and millions of dollars running this scheme. Here's what he says about his own organization, Student Achievement Partners.
So with that in mind, I'm about to jump in, but I'm just going to say one word about my own organization, which is Student Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards.
We are that collection of unqualified people who wrote your kids' standards. Now you understand me now, right? In the words of our Paul, the cell phone guy, do you hear me now, right? The people who put this together had no education, no training, and no objective that is even educationally related. This is about control. This is about ideology. This is about taking your kids from you, about remaking your kids in the image that they want your kids to be. And when you understand that, then you should not be surprised that your kid's math curriculum isn't really a math curriculum. It's not designed to make them good at math. You should not be surprised that they're sexualizing your little kids in elementary school now. You should not be surprised that they're introducing transgender ideology into the kindergarten classroom. to break down the bonds of parents, to pull apart the Judeo-Christian roots of Western culture, to give your kids developmentally inappropriate information at such young ages that they cannot understand it, they can only be brainwashed by it. They can't critically think through it. Because as we saw, right, critical thinking, John Dewey said, was anathema to what we're trying to do in the schools. That's what, we never used to teach 5-year-olds heterosexual marriage, did we? We never taught 5 and 6-year-olds heterosexual sexuality because we recognized that it was they couldn't comprehend it. It didn't make any sense to them. But we have no problem now bringing those issues, homosexuality and transgenderism, into play in our elementary schools. And as a 25-year teacher, the thing that offends me most about this is, you just heard Bill Gates say it. When the curriculum and the tests align, when the standards and the tests align, the curriculum lines up as well. In other words, that's Bill Gates' confirmation that your teachers cannot teach anything other than the Common Core that will lead to these tests. All your teachers are being evaluated on is the Common Core stuff. So even those well-meaning teachers who would like to quietly close the door and teach the kids something else, it will never show up. They're never going to be tested on it. And if it pulls them away from studying the Common Core stuff, it's going to hurt the teachers, which is why so many teachers have walked away. And now we are the same crisis we now have with doctors, thanks to Obamacare. They're projecting tens and tens of thousands of doctor shortages in the next 10 years. In 10 years, it's predicted we're going to be 250,000 teachers shy of what we need. Because teachers who go to the University of Washington and get a degree in education, they're already finding out that under Common Core, we don't have anything to teach. Our job is simply to take what we're given and hand it out. Matter of fact, California has already renamed public school teachers. They don't call them teachers anymore. The state of California calls them facilitators. And you see the difference, right? A teacher is somebody with individual wisdom and gifts and creativity that she can give school kids. A facilitator is just a middleman, somebody who facilitates the transference of a set rote bunch of principles to kids. She didn't do anything else. So to me, the destruction of the teacher is the worst aspect of this. And if you didn't quite hear it clearly from Bill Gates, listen to what the guy who wrote the Common Core Standards says about that.
Which is, teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving. There's no amount of saying they teach to the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
You want to see totalitarianism? Do you want to see fascism? Bolshevism? There is no force strong enough on this earth to stop your teachers teaching to my tests. This guy has no government position, no educational credentials, and he just told you that not the Pope himself and all the Castro brothers behind him can change what's happening in your classrooms now. When we say that the public schools are irredeemable, this is why. Who's going to redeem them? Now the states have no power to do it. I used to go around giving these Common Core talks 5 years ago, and I said to people then, and it was the same thing, I get the same thing here. Come and give a talk. You get half as many people as probably should be here, and many of the people who come are grandmas and grandpas. God bless you. Love it. We're glad that you're here, but 80% of the people at all the talks I've given, I've probably spoken to 300,000 people on this topic in little forums like this, 50, 60 at a time. And yet, it's always 80% grandmas and grandpas. The actual moms and dads don't come. We've got some today, which is amazing. It compensates, right? I'd rather talk to a small group that's got a lot of moms and dads in it, right? Because as much as the grandparents want to help, you know how it is, how prickly it is talking to your daughter about how she's educating her kids, right? Comes an issue. And so it's a big deal. But what he said there, there's no way you can shirk that off. And here's the frustrating thing. You walk into any Washington school district tomorrow and you ask to see the principal or the superintendent. They're going to tell you that none of this is true. That's not true. Our teachers can do whatever they want. Go bring the video clips I send to you and ask for 10 minutes to show your principal 2 or 3 of these clips. They're going to look at you and say it's just not true. This is the guy, Jason Zimba, who's responsible for the math curriculum. He's one of the 5 who wrote, he's actually a math professor who wrote the Common Core math standards. In this short video clip, Jason Zimba is going to admit that his math program, the one your kids in public schools are all laboring under, His math, Common Core math, will not prepare your kids for college math. And it will not prepare your kids for STEM careers. A math program that will not prepare your kids for careers in science, technology, engineering, or math. You know, the unimportant things. So here's the question before I even play the clip. Who puts together a national math program that every public school kid has to take, without exception, no way getting around it, that won't prepare them for college math, and certainly won't prepare them for STEM careers? He's being interviewed here by Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who actually was one of the first great opponents of Common Core math and was hired by Common Core to vet the standards. And she said they are so bad you should get rid of them. They ignored Dr. Stotsky and published them anyway. And here she is getting some revenge on Zimba. Here.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective college.
It's not only not for STEM. Right? It is a minimal definition of college readiness. It is not only, he says, is it not for STEM, it's not for selective colleges. And what he means by selective colleges, he's going to throw out the example of UC Berkeley. For instance, if your kid wants to go to UC Berkeley, he better have advanced math. But the reality is that a selective college is any college that has a basic math requirement. They're all selective that way. Some have higher requirements than others, but no college in this country has a math standard that's high school or level or below. Wouldn't make any sense. And so his admissions here are pretty staggering. I won't stop at this time. Listen to the end. And listen to what he said again. It is remarkable. And when you think about this, a professor of mathematics who's conceding openly that this will not prepare your kids for college math and it won't prepare them for STEM careers, the obvious question becomes, then we must look and see what they are doing. And that explains all the politics and the ideology that I've been at pains to show you so far.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you'd better have pre-calculus to get into UC Berkeley, right?
But we have to think of our engineering colleges and scientific
That's true.
education.
I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that. But your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that out.
I'm not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you. And that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
And all he can do is shake his head yes. And his premise, Zimba's premise is that at best, Common Core math at best might prepare your kids for a 2-year technical college. But see, the question that stands begged to be answered there is, Stotsky answered, what about our scientific, our engineering colleges? This is a math program that every kid has to take. And you're telling me that every kid is only going to be educated in math to maybe the bright ones, to the community college level. Still, the question is unanswered. Well, then where are we going to get engineers? Well, that's the same place we get our doctors from, right? What happens with socialized medicine in Europe? Places like England, the National Health, right? What happens? They pass socialized medicine. Doctors recognize that it's a lot of school, and they don't get paid any better than anybody else. And they get shuffled around wherever the government needs them. They've lost all autonomy, and so there are no doctors. And so what happens? Pakistani doctors or Chinese doctors. And it's interesting, isn't it? Notice how the National Health in England never brings over doctors from Canada or Australia or New Zealand. They always import a professional class from places where there's a long history of oppressive government, right? A long cultural history of autocratic leadership. And so same thing's going to happen with teachers. Same thing's already happening with engineers and tech people, right? And some of you are giving me why in the world would our government want to consciously dumb us down? Okay, I'll tell you why. To control you, right? If we continue to turn out like we did 80, 90 years ago, if we continue to turn out patriots who know and understand and love the Constitution, if we continue to turn out entrepreneurs, people who can start with nothing and make something, who can open a business and make it work through sweat and hard work, we can do that. If we allow people to continue to arm themselves. If we allow that, if we turn out children who don't need handouts or welfare, well, we can't control them. If, however, we increasingly make the younger generations utterly dependent on the state, not able to take care of those, if we burden young college kids with trillions of dollars of student loan debt, they will come to us, the people who burden them with it, to take it. That's why the next president, I'm predicting this, will be the one who promises to waive tuition debt. Our kids right now have $1.2 trillion of student loan debts. Trillion with a T. Our kids have more student loan debt for college than the collected credit card debt of the entire nation. That's never getting paid back. I predict that if Hillary Clinton had not kneecapped Bernie Sanders, I think he'd be the president right now, because that was his platform. You got a whole generation of millennials, kids under the age of 30, 35, who have shocking debt. And you know, now for the first time in American history over the last 10 years, a college degree is no longer a guarantee of a job. So you have a lot of college graduates now with $70, $80, $90, $150,000 of student loan debt, and they can't get jobs. These aren't the high school dropouts, right, who can't get jobs except menial jobs, and everybody assumes that that's where they should be so we don't worry about it. These are highly college-educated kids now who aren't finding jobs. They're not going to settle for, we'll just flip burgers, right? That's why they're going to government. It's how the system works. You'll love this. Not only is David Coleman, well, by 2014, David Coleman had done all the work. The Common Core standards were already in place. Guess where he is now? This man with no education background. He is the president of the college boards. You know the organization whose job it is to create the ACTs, the tests your kids have to take to get into college? Guess who's in charge of that program now? David Coleman. And David Coleman is aligning the ACTs with his own Common Core standards. So if you the threat is that if you homeschool your kids, they won't be Common Core proficient, and they will struggle on those exams, which of course has got states like California now making exactly that argument against homeschooling. California is contemplating a bill right now that will force government agents into every homeschooler's house twice a year to make sure it's a safe environment, to force homeschool moms in California to get teaching credentials from big state universities before they're allowed to teach their kids. And here's the other joy. The college boards are in charge of all the advanced placement courses your high school kids take. So hundreds and hundreds of thousands of high school kids, their junior and senior year, are taking advanced placement courses in math and English and history. And what happens is, for $100, mom pops out $100, and the kids get a year-long American history class that's supposed to be taught a little bit differently than the traditional one. And if at the end of that year's class they can take a short exam and pass it, then they opt out of their college history. For $100 for a class versus $4,000 at UW, kids by the hundreds of thousands are taking these AP courses. Well, guess who's now in charge of the AP? David Coleman is. And the first test he rewrote, the first advanced placement curriculum he rewrote, was the history one. First thing you got to do is keep our kids ignorant of American history. There is rising, this is 2015, for his first year on the job, there is rising alarm over radical changes that have been made to the Advanced Placement American History Program, a program heavily funded by federal and state funding. So you, Washington, are paying David Coleman to rewrite American history in an anti-American history way, with him having no credentials. A program heavily supported by federal and state funding. That alarm, we can skip that. To summarize, the private college board is rewriting its AP courses, starting with AP US History. APUSH is the abbreviation. The new APUSH framework departs radically from the traditional AP courses and now reflects progressive philosophy and leftist bias. Forget the founding fathers and the principles of the Declaration of Independence that proclaim the natural right of freedom and self-government. Concentrate instead on the racist cultural imperialism that supposedly built America. Ignore all previous state history standards, most or all of which actually were, including Washington's, I've looked at it, the one you had before David Coleman took over, the state of Washington standards were very good. They were fact-based. They were not controversial. They didn't inject politics. Well, you jettisoned them now for this, for the AP courses. And when David Coleman, hundreds and hundreds of liberal college history professors petitioned David Coleman and begged him not to do it, they argued, you're going to teach kids a false view of American history. His response was, David Coleman, facts don't matter in history class anyway. The facts of American history don't matter. Well, that's what replaced facts. Historical narratives. Kids are now asked to write questions on the test like this. Discuss the racist nature of the founding of America. Discuss the way America has mistreated women for 200 years. Discuss American homophobia from the colonial period through the Civil War. These are the kind of questions they have to write about. And here's the catch. The teachers who teach these courses in the high schools, the kids have to pass them. The moms are paying money for them. The kids can't fail them. Or most of the kids have to pass them, or no one will take them. So guess what the high school teachers have to do? They have to completely change the way they teach history to prepare these kids for these very politically tendentious exams. Here is an example of, they have almost nothing to say about the Founding Fathers. Very little. In fact, most of the American history course focuses on the progressive period in American history, after the Civil War. What they say about the Founding Fathers is scandalous lies. The only thing your kids will learn about Thomas Jefferson is that he's a racist slaveholder. That's it. Nothing else. Is that now, and when you see this, do you now understand, I hope you now understand, why the young generation of college kids and under wants to tear down statues, pull down flags. Jefferson's birthday was 3 weeks ago. Statues at the University of Virginia, which Thomas Jefferson created, his statue now is splashed with blood. And here's the thing. You could pull down all the Confederate flags you want. You can pretend that the Confederate flag meant just one thing, hatred. You can pretend that's all it meant. It didn't stand for anything else. Pull it down. But if you let them do that, we are acceding to the argument that the bad aspects of our history should be whitewashed too. And here's the thing. If the Confederate flag has to come down, then so does the American flag, and that will come next. The American flag flew over slave states much longer than the Confederate flag did. And I don't buy either argument. I don't think you erase our history. You don't stop teaching kids about Auschwitz because offensive things happened to Jewish people. You don't do it. But we are now starting to sanitize the way we teach things. Start to sanitize the way we teach our own history, right? Any aspect of our history that's not politically correct by progressive standards has to be censored. We're not teaching Huckleberry Finn to high school kids because it uses the N-word. That's seriously. We are not teaching it anymore. And Ralph Ellison, the African-American novelist who wrote Invisible Man, Ellison said, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn is the most moral book on race ever written. It is a screed. It is a long argument against racial prejudice. But because that word's there, our kids can't read it anymore. That's how they're doing it. And here's all it says about George Washington, right? If there is one figure in American history, Americans ought to be rightly proud of, it's George Washington. And here's what the AP kids learn about him. Although Washington dressed in plain American broadcloth at his inauguration and claimed to be content with a plain Republican title, Washington was counted among the nationalists. I'm surprised they didn't call him alt-right. Washington was counted among the nationalists. He was anything but a man of the people. By nature reserved and solemn, he chose to ride about town in a grand carriage drawn by 6 horses and escorted by uniformed liverymen in the tradition of British royalty. He delivered his addresses personally to Congress and received from both houses a reply, and that's pretty much all they learn. They don't learn about the crossing of the Delaware, don't learn about any of the battles. They don't even learn that they're basically accusing Jefferson of being no better than King George. And yet, they never do learn that Congress actually offered Washington a crown. He could have been a king. He didn't want it. But they don't learn that. And they dismiss him. Barack Obama's inauguration, just the inauguration of Barack Obama goes on for about 60 pages. Just the inauguration. FDR, won't surprise you, gets more coverage for the first 4 years of his term than every Republican president in history got, including Lincoln, for anything they ever did. It gets even better. So 215, first year on the job, David Coleman rewrites American history. Surprise, surprise. Year number 2, he rewrites European history. The new advanced placement European history framework has received a makeover that eliminates religion's influence on the development of Western civilization. 2,000 years of Western culture and not one mention of Christianity at all. Not the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, not the Protestant Reformation, none of it. You're teaching kids 2,000 years of Western culture, and you have eradicated any and all religious topics from it. Right? The new advanced placement history framework has eliminated religion's influence on the development of Western civ. It completely ignores Winston Churchill. It whitewashes the evils of communism. It lauds the welfare state. According to David Randall, a professor with the National Association of Scholars, quote, "The new curriculum omits the development of faith and freedom in European history and focuses on the development of the welfare state." Randall told the College Fix, he claims that the new framework, quote, "warps and guts the history of Europe to make it serve today's progressive agenda." Kate Hardiman says, in the 19th century alone, all mention of religion virtually is removed. Several key figures, such as Christopher Columbus and Winston Churchill, are not mentioned in the framework. David Coleman, president of the College Board, was a major architect of the Common Core standards. How about this from the College Board's, from David Randall, quote, the AP history exam defines modernization around secularism, the state, all with thin support of intellectual history. It uses words like capitalism rather than free market to note how consumers and capitalists work against the environment. It gives the sense that the Industrial Revolution contributed more to poverty than to prosperity, and it whitewashes the repressive Marxist and Soviet histories of Eastern Europe and predominantly features leftist Enlightenment political thinkers. Quote, it presents European history in a dull, flat, politically slanted jargon, and it is a hollowed-out version of our history. And then you ask, why is there so much sex in your kids' Common Core schools? Why indeed now? Are we having, in kindergartens in California, coming out parties for 5-year-olds who switch genders in class? That actually happened in a California school. Why are we bringing all kinds of ideology into the classroom of kids? And whatever you think about transgenderism and homosexuality, think whatever you want. The fact is that to 5 and 6-year-olds? No, that's just indoctrination. And so, why? Well, look at this. This document came out, and you can watch it, 64 pages, you can read it online. Came out in 2012, the same year Common Core entered your schools. The Common Core, whatever else it is we've already established, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Common Core is not about education. One of the things Common Core is a Trojan horse for federal entities and non-federal entities like Planned Parenthood to slip their ideologies into your kid's school. One of the groups that bankrolled this federal new standard system is Planned Parenthood. National sexuality, so they're national, they're standards, they're even core content. They created these standards out of whole cloth. They made them up. They had no books or pedagogy. They had no confirmed tests to use. They made it all up. What is the content that gets filled into those empty standards? Well, stuff like this. And this is a reaction, these national education standards. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan imposed an abstinence-only curriculum in our schools. That our public schools could teach biology, sperm and egg. Biology is what they could teach. But the morality or the ethics or the philosophy of sex, that belonged to the parents. There was no business with public school teachers teaching sexual morality to our kids. That's the parents' job. Well, ever since then, the left has been apoplectic about this. They've been planning for 40 years the time they could begin to put into the schools comprehensive sexuality education. And what does that mean? Comprehensive sex ed is the idea, the exact opposite idea, that what we teach in the schools sexually is every aspect of sexuality. We shape their values and their worldviews. We normalize sexual behaviors and acts that historically have been considered wrong. We break apart the traditional family as a ruling agent in family life. And notice when they start doing it. This is the Common Core content for your kids' schools and the skills, not just the information, the sexual skills we teach your kids starting when they're 5 years old. And if you go to the 4th page of the document, when the Common Core, these national sexuality standards were created, look at what they built themselves on. They were based on the Common Core state standards for English and math. What in the world would you create? How in the world? Why in the world would you create a set of national sexual standards that are predicated on Common Core English and math? Because comprehensive sex reform means that they're going to teach sex to your kids in math class. And they're going to teach it in English class, and they're going to teach it in social studies class, and they're going to teach it in gym class, and they're going to teach it in every... Because if all they did was teach your kids 2 weeks of sex ed in a biology class in sophomore year, you'd opt your kids out of it. You can't opt your kids out of math, right? They're sexualizing every aspect of the curriculum. Go a little further. Go to the end of the book. Here's what they say teachers have to know. Here's what they say teachers need. Instruction, to be able to do all this, instruction by qualified sexuality education teachers is essential for student achievement. At some of the universities I've taught at 7, they're actually making their education majors. Your kid wants to be a middle school math teacher? Well, one thing they have to do before they can get their certification is take a little seminar on how to teach sex through math, or sex through English, or sex through history. A little further. Students need opportunities to engage in cooperative and active learning strategies when it comes to sex. So this can't be a teacher just talking to kids. There have to be group work assignments. Kids have to be engaged. Sufficient time must be allocated for all students to practice skills relating to sexuality education. Students need multiple opportunities and a variety of assessment strategies to determine their achievement of the sexuality standards and how to perform them. This is taken right from the document, which you can read online. Go read it. When you read it, you will find it's worse than I'm telling you. I can only show you so much. Got this a week and a half before I decided to come and see you. Thought I'd throw it in there. Got this from the father of a Madison, Wisconsin middle school kid. 4th grader. He's in 4th grade, this kid. My son informed me that they are studying gay rights in U.S. history class. For 3 weeks of their American history class, they are setting aside to talk about homosexuality and gay rights in the modern world, not the history of homosexuality, about gay rights in a history class. My son informed me that they are studying gay rights in history class, and this part of the class expounded on the expansion of the new meaning of gender. It was not presented in an open classroom discussion format. This is the way it is in today's public school. He sent me the assignments for his 4th grader. Here is what they were handed out. 76 different alternative genders. 76. Masculine homosexual man. Attract man, 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 right? Masculine heterosexual woman. And for 76 of these different things. Here's the thing that will blow you away. We know biologically underpinned male and female, right? Biology teaches us that male and female exist. There is not a shred of anatomical or biological evidence that there is anything but male and female in nature. Yet, if you argue in a public school classroom that there is man and woman, they're going to call you a bigot, like that kid from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, the college kid, right? Who about 2 months ago was booted from his biology class because he challenged the teacher. He says, we're biology students. He held up the book. The book says male and female. The professor took him out of class, had him removed from his dorm, and he was this close to being expelled simply for, in a biology class, suggesting that male and female existed. The national media got a hold of this, and they put him back. They didn't have any legal reason to be able to do it, but they were going to try. This is where we are. If on a major university you say man and woman exist, you're a bigot. But there are 76 different made-up genders. If you don't agree with them, then you're in trouble. Notice what happens here. Science is no longer a hedge or a protection. Let me show you this a little bit more. Here are some of the genders that these kids were studying instead of studying history. Something called ego gender. Gender so personal, it is described as you. Gender blank. All that comes to mind when an individual thinks about gender is nothing. Gyra gender. Being multiple genders but not understanding which one you are. Mirror gender. Gender that changes to fit the people around you. So that's a thing now, right? I'm a man when I'm talking to men. I'm a woman when I'm talking to women. If I'm talking to a transgender person, I'm both. And these things you have to take seriously or you're a bigot. Paragender, identifying with a gender. I love this one. Identifying with a gender, but not as a gender. Quoigender. Gender is felt as inapplicable to you. Surgender, 100% one gender, but with Common Core math. 100% one gender, but with more added. Virangender, gender that disappears as soon as you identify it. Your kids are being taught in elementary and middle school that this is categorically true, while the only thing that is a social construct is male and female. And you know who agreed with me about all the ridiculousness of this testing? Our entire kids' education in the public schools is being subordinated to these great big tests. If you're going to give 60 million American school kids the same test, you do understand, right, that there's not a thing in the world that test can tell a working teacher. They're too big, they're too broad. They have no educational value. The kind of standardized tests that our kids' education has been hijacked by, they have no practical educational value. What are they good for? They gather lots of information, lots of data gathering on our kids, lots of psychosocial evaluative processes. They're actually creating these tests so that your kids are designed to fail them. They want to measure how fast your kid gives up. I'll prove that in a moment. But this guy, in 2007, right before he became president, he agreed 100% with me. Listen to what he said.
Don't tell us that the only way to teach a child is to spend too much of a year preparing him to fill out a few bubbles in a standardized test. We know that's not true.
Don't tell me that the only way to teach a kid is meaningless, stupid bubble tests. 1 year later, he was president, and the entire system is meaningless bubble tests now. And that's the NEA. I told you about them, and they're cheering him. And a year later, when he reduced the entire educational system to those very same tests, they cheered him then. How bad are our standardized tests, this system, when left-wing comedians make fun of it? Here's John Oliver, right, who replaced what's-his-face on The Daily Show. Listen to what John Oliver said about these exams.
If standardized tests are bad for teachers and bad for kids, who exactly are they good for? Well, it turns out they're operated by companies like all these. And let's just focus on the largest one, Pearson. As of 2012, they had nearly 40% of the testing market, almost triple their nearest competitor. And if you've never heard of them, then congratulations. But just mention their name to any parent or teacher in a state they operate in, and you see what happens. A hypothetical girl could take Pearson tests from kindergarten through at least 8th grade, tests, by the way, that she studied for using Pearson curriculum and textbooks taught to her by teachers who were certified by their own Pearson test. If at some point she was tested for a learning disability like ADHD, that's also a Pearson test. And if she eventually got sick of Pearson and dropped out, well, she'd have to take the GED, which is now, guess what? Also a Pearson test. Their track record is littered with complaints concerning technical glitches, slow grading, and even the contents of their tests. Take what happened in New York just a few years ago.
Almost 30 different test questions have now been declared invalid because they're confusing or have outright errors. They'd already pulled 6 questions from an English exam related to a bizarre passage about a talking pineapple. Students had to answer questions about the story, which they say goes like this. A pineapple challenges a hare to a race. Other animals figure the fruit has a trick up its sleeve, but the hare wins and the animals eat the pineapple. It ends with the moral. Pineapples don't have sleeves.
I was really confused because I expected a lot more from them. That article about the pineapple and the hare was stupid and absurd.
And you heard what the kid said. This is going to blow you away. Our entire kids' education now is reduced to these exams. Did you know that teachers don't get to see the exams? Did you know that teachers don't write the exams? You heard what the reporter said. According to the kids, that particularly bad story went like this because we've never seen the exam. And you, as the mom and dad of kids in these schools who have to take these tests, if you show up to your schools, they will not let you see the exams. Teachers, parents, no one gets to see them. You understand how Orwellian this is, right? And they do them upload on Bill Gates' computers. You can't see them. Teachers don't even grade the exams. Teachers don't. Would it surprise you to learn that big companies who are doing these tests are taking out Craigslist ads? $9 an hour for people to come in off the streets and grade the exams. This is the last slide I'm going to show you. Listen to this little bit of information.
The company posted this ad to Craigslist. It's to find people to grade the exams.
We looked at an essay every 2 minutes, a short answer every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. We don't understand your kids. We don't understand anyone's kids.
I was told when I was beginning a project that last year, there were a certain amount of 2s, a certain amount of 3s, a certain amount of 4s. We expect that to be similar this year. If that's not similar, they will tell you, we're scoring too many 3s, we're scoring too many 4s. And they'll say, you have to learn to see more papers as a 3. You have to learn to see more papers as a 4.
So $9 an hour expressly for non-teachers to come in and grade the tests. And as that fell, I've been a 25-year teacher in universities. I cannot grade a short answer in 5 seconds. I can't grade a short essay in 5 minutes. And I have 13 years of graduate school. These people taken off the streets for $9 are given 5 seconds. These tests mean everything, and they get 5 seconds to grade the short answers and 5 minutes. 2 minutes is what he said. 2 minutes to grade a short essay. 2 minutes. And you saw the last group of people, none of whom had any educational background, telling you, and then when we graded them, they kept telling us to change the grades to fit the pattern we already have for it. The whole thing is a scam. The whole thing is a scam. And that's your kid's educational system. Now, do you understand why I tell you that they cannot be fixed? They can't. You have one option. Get your kids out. And ordinarily, this went longer than I thought, and we got a little bit started late. I'm not going to spend any time on Freedom Project. I mean, people have to get places. I know even some of our organizers have to get out of here. We gave a long talk yesterday on Freedom Project. Matt, we've got other people in the room, the John Birch people back there. Please, did you guys bring the pamphlet? All right, we've got some school pamphlets for you. Just take them. Real quickly, in order to try to fix all of this, I helped create a school called Freedom Project. It's a completely online education for kids from kindergarten through high school. We bring live teachers into your classroom. Live qualified teachers teach your kids over the internet with other kids in the virtual classroom as well. They have classmates. We can do all of this now. Technology has contributed to a lot of our ills, but we can also fix them. So if you're somebody who wants to homeschool, but don't think you feel qualified or intimidated by it, if you like the idea of homeschool, we can do it for you. We can bring real teachers into your house. And a lot of moms and dads have been taking our stuff. They'll take them for a year or two, and they figure out how to do it by watching our teachers do it, and they move forward. You're going to go ahead and pass them out. Yeah, that's great. I'd love to be able to show you more, but it would take 30, 40 minutes to give you a good overview. This is one way to solve the problem, right? I mean, we've got families in Washington State here, and where's Chris? The one thing I'm going to do as I wrap up here is we actually are fortunate. We have a Freedom Project dad here. So I'm going to let him speak for a couple of minutes about what goes on, and then maybe if you have any questions, Chris and I will try to address them about any aspect of what you've seen today. But I do want Chris, who's got 2 of his children with us, to just give you a quick overview about what it is.
I have 4 kids. My oldest 2 daughters went through the whole public school system. Well, not entirely. My second daughter, we got her out of middle school, pulled her out of our middle school in Post Falls because mostly not just the curriculum we were in question, but the social stuff that was going on that she was telling us about, kids getting pregnant in the 6th grade. Okay, that happens. That's horrible, but that's what's going on. So we pulled them out of the public school system thinking, well, they're not going to be bullied, they're not going to be influenced by the kids who were smoking dope in the back, getting pregnant in 6th grade, things like that. But then we put them into the online K through 12 system, which is great. We have a little more control, a little more oversight into what our kids are being taught. Turned out that's not the case either. We had no way to question the teachers about some of the stuff that they were teaching, things like that. So when we found Freedom Project Academy, and I looked up exactly what they were teaching, I thought, wow, this is exactly what I want my kids to learn. And let me give you an example. While you were talking about Common Core math, my son, who is in 9th grade, and he went through kindergarten through the 7th grade in the public school system, which puts him a little bit behind normally for Freedom Project Academy. They're a little more challenging. Well, this year, his math teacher and I discussed this over the phone. He was doing some of his math the old Common Core way, and she actually took him aside in a separate meeting and taught him the old long-form math like most of us had learned in school. And I graduated in 1990, so I'm a little bit part of this. You know, you said 1962, right? Was when they really started to change the education system. So even my generation was the beginnings of this. They make absolutely sure that not only are they not teaching Common Core, they will make sure that your kids are learning the proper way. If they're applying these Common Core standards, they'll make sure that they're applying the proper math so that they will learn it properly, and so that we as parents who learned the proper math can also teach them as well. That's one of the things I wanted to bring up. A better thing for me at this point, or when we get down the road here, is to be able to answer some specific questions about how we do things. The kids are in school 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. They have Fridays off. They're not in school all day long. 2, 3 hours, 4 hours a day at the most. And then they have proper homework. They have to fill out books, you know, workbooks, and scan them and enter them in. It's not all just done online through standardized means. They have to teach them, one of the things I loved about it is they teach them cursive writing. They don't even teach cursive writing in schools anymore. In fact, they minimize it. They don't even teach it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. I had a couple of other thoughts, but I think they would come up better if I had people asking specific questions when the time comes. Yes?
You mentioned how much you like the fact that they're recorded.
The classrooms are recorded, but they're also live. The kids are required, my son is required to be in attendance in his classroom, and that means he has to be logged on. He can't just log on and walk away. The teacher pays attention to whether they're raising their hand. They have a little button they can click that'll show that their hand is raised. They can click a button and their microphone turns on so that the teacher and the rest of the class can hear if they have a question or if the teacher calls on them to answer. So they are live. They're required to have that structured live classroom environment, but also they record the classes so that after the class is over, if the kid wants to go back and go, okay, I want to go back and listen to what that teacher said again. I missed something about that. I can go listen to it again. We as the parents can go back and listen to every single one of the classes from every single day of the school year so that we can see what the teachers are teaching our kids, so that we can either A, confirm that what they're teaching is what we believe, or B, if we have a question or a concern, we can say, look, the teacher said this on this day. You can talk to the staff and they can take care of it. And so far I haven't seen anything in there yet that has been an issue, but I'm glad that I have that ability to do that. And as a parent, there's a lot of stuff that there's no way I could homeschool teach my kids. I'm good with math, I'm good with English, but you know, when it comes to chemistry and biology, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know if the book that I bought is teaching the right things in a lot of cases. I can trust the fact that these are real accredited teachers that can also teach me as I'm also teaching my kids. You know, as parents, we can actually get on there, look at these reviews, these videos that the kids are learning, look at the books that we have in front of us for our kids, and we can actually learn as parents as well, and I think that's just an absolute plus. But it gives the kids the structure of being in a classroom environment, deadlines for homework. If the homework is not done and turned in by a certain time, it is considered late, and in the high school grades, it is an automatic 0. That seems kind of rough and mean, but it really gets the kids to understand that deadlines are very, very important. My son does struggle with this a little bit, and he's done some of his homework, but he didn't turn it in on time, or he forgot to turn it in, or he turned in the wrong page. He gets a 0. Is that fair? Yeah, I think it is fair, because he didn't do the requirements. It works well in all of these ways because it takes and makes the whole education thing more efficient, because my son, Mondays and Wednesdays he has 3 classes, and one's at 6 in the morning, one's at 10, and one's at 11. It's kind of like college. You have different, adjustments like that. But he can take that time between the classes and do his homework. He can spend 5 hours a day doing his classes and good homework, and then have the rest of the day to do co-ops and social activities and recreation and things like that. They can take that 8-hour day that we normally have our kids in school, crunch it down into a more efficient time frame, and he also has more time to go do the studying that he needs to do, more time to do youth groups, and as I said, co-ops and things like that. It's just a great way to make the education system work. And like what Matt Shea was saying, this isn't trying to fix what's already so broken, it's unfixable. This is a new way to teach our kids. What was the thing you said yesterday, Matt, about what you thought would be going on in 10 years?
That there would be no need. I said yesterday that there would be no need, very likely in 10 years, for there to be a brick and mortar school.
And I can see that. I can see that with the way that this works. Yeah, yeah.
And Dr. Pesta, could you talk about the church partnership?
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to add, a couple more things that are relevant. We are fully accredited, which means if your kid gets a high school diploma from Freedom Project, he gets into college. We've got kids in colleges all across the country. We've got 4 kids in Hillsdale right now. We just had a kid last year who got a full ride to Baylor. So we get kids in good colleges. Number one, we can teach from kindergarten through high school. And you don't have to take the whole school year with us. As Chris said, if you're a mom or dad, perfectly content teaching your kids history and English and basic math, but you just need a chemistry class, or you just want your kids to have a history class that's going to be a little bit fairer, you can take ours. We have a lot of moms that do that. Our history is really unique in high school. We teach 3 full years of American history. And each year, the first semester is history. The second semester of every year is always civics, which never gets taught in school. The founding documents, we have them read the Constitution, we have them read Bastiat's The Law, we have them read de Tocqueville on the American Experience. Our kids are getting a good history, but they're also getting the complex ways, the rights and responsibilities of living and making a difference in a republic. They're learning those things. And so we require economics at every grade level, a introductory level for the elementary, basic economics for the little kids, more serious for the middle school kids, and advanced economics all of our high school kids have to take. Some moms and dads just take our economics classes. We have Alex Newman does a great job of teaching that class for us. And then also one thing that we've decided now that we've done for about 2 years, starting to become really big, is this is not just for an individual family. We have these beautiful churches all across the country that are hubs of activity on Saturdays and Sunday, but they're empty Monday through Friday. And one of the big things that pastors will always say is, we can't afford teachers and the insurance for the teachers, and we can't become bonded in these areas. And well, what if we were able to beam our school, and our teachers do all the grading, all the assignment of textbooks, right? All the discipline, we handle all of that. What if we were able to beam an entire school into a church? We've already got 16 or 17 different partnerships, Alabama, California, Michigan, Wisconsin, where kids are doing this now. And there are 16 kids or 9 kids or 11 kids or 4 kids, and it's really working well. And for 2 or 3 hours a day, all it takes is one youth pastor, right, or a volunteer mom. Some places, a different mom volunteers every month to just watch the kids, make sure that the computers are turned on, make sure that there's nothing going wrong. And so 2 to 3 hours a day, they're getting their school at the church instead of the big public environment. And then for 45 minutes or an hour after they're done with their lessons, they're actually getting a Bible study with a minister. I mean, what would happen if we were able to reconnect church and school? One of the reasons we're in this mess is because a long time ago, progressives figured out how to completely divorce Christianity from the schools, right? This is a fantastic way to put it back together, to give our kids a legitimate classical education and to expose our kids to genuine Christianity, Judeo-Christian thought, all in the course of a friendly environment, a pastoral environment. So the partnerships are starting to grow. If you know any pastors who might be interested, it's very affordable and very doable. And it's a way, and you think about pastors, what better way? Every pastor I know laments the fact that the kids of his parishioners go off to school and don't find themselves making their way back to church, right? I mean, they're oftentimes lost to the culture. And that's because we don't have any real meaningful outreach for those kids or provide parents with an option to the really corrosive public schools that we can say categorically. Even if you're dubious about everything that I've shown you, I think it's common nature to understand that the one thing our kids will get in the government schools is divorced from any serious contemplation of Christianity. Happens at my university. I teach the great classics of Western culture. I teach the great Christian books of the Western world, from the Bible to Dante to Milton, right, to Shakespeare. I teach those books, and my kids are puzzled when I teach them. I teach them the way they were written. When Christ is all over those books, I put Christ all over the board. And they're just blown away because they've read important books like this before, but all their public school teachers and all their university professors scrupulously ignored the Christianity that made the books possible. They're imposing Marxism and feminist readings and environmentalist readings on the books, and they're ignoring what they say. If we had kids, were able to put this kind of an education back in a church environment where pastors could then follow up with kids, isn't that, if I may borrow a phrase, isn't that combination of classical education, individuality, and Christian thought, isn't that what made America great? Yes. And it can do it again if we can put it back there. So Questions or thoughts? Yes, sir. For me or for Chris? Or Matt, too.
After yesterday's presentation, I spoke to a number of people who teach like that. What I loved it most, and feel free to share this later, was my neighbor. My next neighbor was an engineer. So he was talking about this, and he mentioned, and this was important to me because back in 1982, I took our oldest daughter out of high school in 10th grade, et cetera, because of this very type of thing then. His daughter's older and the son is younger. The daughter's in school, she complains about being bored, couldn't advance, etc. So he talked to the teachers, and the one did suggest, well, you can buy some other materials, and you can use that on your time off. Well, he did that, and so this is what he told me last night, over the fence. He did that, and then soon the teacher was calling him, you can't let her have any more outside books because she's excited about education now, and she's sharing them with the students, and they want to do that too. So you can't do that anymore because she's unsettling for the rest of the class.
Right. Enthusiasm and achievement are a big no-no, right? We don't want the low-performing kids to feel bad. And a quick anecdote about engineering. I got my PhD from Purdue University, one of the great engineering colleges in the country. A couple of months ago, there's all in the news, Purdue hired a new dean of engineering, a woman, and she said it is her mission as the dean of engineering at Purdue University to do what it takes to diversify engineering. Too many white men engineers. She said, and I quote, if I have to lower the rigor of our engineering program to get more women and minorities in it, I must do that. So if we have to compromise engineering to diversify it, that's what she's going to do. And that's at Purdue. And so the colleges, you can see this here. It's social justice, right? And if I point out the obvious, do you remember that bridge collapse down in Florida? Do you remember who they hired to do it, that city in Florida? They wanted a diversity hire. So they hired a feminist engineering group. A couple of lesbians founded this engineering corporation, and there had been all sorts of problems with their buildings in the past, code violations. Anyway, in the name of diversity, they hired this group, and the bridge collapsed, right? And so you could, in a very meaningful sense, you can say that this kind of commitment to diversity, it's killing people, right? And this, I think it's kind of insulting. The idea that women are incapable of engineering, so we have to lower the standards. Gee, if we've got to dumb down engineering to get more Hispanics in it, that's the kind of racist paternalism that should be fought. You don't lower the standards of achievement, right? And that's exactly what our schools are doing now. They're forgetting achievement, they're forgetting excellence, they're forgetting even the laws of science. That was my biology point, right? Man and woman don't exist. But all those weird amalgams, they're socially true. It's a dangerous place to be nowadays.
Let me give you an example real quick of one of the classes that my son took, and this just blew me away when he started this year in 9th grade. He's taking a class called Consumer Math. They're teaching math via real-world applications, which is something that I don't know that has been done in American schools in many, many years. His first course was about auto insurance rates and premiums. And if anybody who's ever dealt with that on any level at all, if you own a car, auto insurance rates and premiums are like mind-blowing for all of us. They're teaching him percentages and how to multiply and how to do those kinds of maths through this understanding of auto insurance premiums, that he's going to have a leg up on all of his peers because that's how they're teaching the math. They're teaching the math. He just got done doing a section on home mortgage rates. And he's done sections on stocks and bonds. They're teaching them math through these applications that, we always had the cliche of, we're never going to use that when we get out of high school. He is going to use this when he gets out of high school, and he's going to have an understanding of it because he's learning it through real-world applications.
Some ladies here. And then this lady was first, and this gentleman.
I'm just curious how you are teaching about God and Jesus in the University of Wisconsin without getting fired, actually.
There's a reason I've been at 7 different universities. I mean, up until I started doing this 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't have much of a presence on the internet, and so they don't know what your politics are. My academic credentials are sterling. I mean, I've got teaching awards, I've written books. But the problem is once you get hired, and I'm not stupid, I don't go into a new university and start saying, start evangelizing. I just do my thing. I simply ask the kids questions. But here's the thing. Almost within the first 5 class periods, these kids are going to the other teachers, not in a mean way, but they say, Dr. Pesta said this, how come I never heard this before? And they're all excited, right? Like exactly. And when my liberal peers hear that, they do not like it. And so I was teaching at a little tiny liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia back in 2000, right about the year 2000. And I ended up getting fired. The president called me into his office and said, "You're fired." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the other faculty don't agree with your worldview." That's what he said. So you can imagine I had to sue them. I actually won the case, as a matter of fact. But before that happened, I had a creative writing professor, one of my colleagues, come up to me and he said, "Dr. Pesta, I understand that you're teaching multiple sides of an issue in your classroom." And I thought, I learned a lot since then. I thought, I was all excited. I'm like, I thought he was going to praise me for this. I said, yeah. He goes, no. And 95% of this little college is Ursinus College. 95% of the student body came from Philadelphia, which is like one of the bluest cities in the whole country. He said to me, "Dr. Pesta, our kids come to school so racist and sexist that you must only teach them progressive philosophy." Right? That was and within a week of, and I laughed at him and walked away, and with a week from that I had been fired. And so it's a long story. In fact, if you type in my name in Ursinus College, I'm on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer about this story. I had hair then, if you'd like to get a look at that. It was a long story, but yes, I think you're exactly right about that. Yes, sir.
Will the evil views talked about today permeate all or most of our colleges and universities? Will we have a place to send our children and grandchildren?
It's the same problem. College is a little bit different. Colleges are just as bad or worse. However, in a big, if you send them to the University of Washington to do business, to get an MBA at the University of Washington, I guarantee you they'll find 2 or 3 professors that are middle of the road. And I have a lot more faith in my 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds to at least have, especially if they've got a good education moving before it. If you give your kids a good homeschool education, good Christian education, give them an FPE education, at least that kid, when he steps on a college campus, is going to recognize when the professor's trying to indoctrinate him. Exactly. The ones that are getting lost are the ones who go through this bad, corrupted government school education. Because for 12 years, they get this, then they step onto a college campus, and that's all they get. But it's also all they know. That's why the kids would get so excited when I taught them. Not that I don't measure being a good teacher by what they say. They don't know. So when a kid says to me, "You're my favorite teacher," I take it with a grain of salt. The one comment that means something to me, and I get it a lot, thank God I get it a lot, is when a kid says to me, I hear it all the time, "How come no one's told me this before? Why is it that I've never heard this before?" I said, "Good." I said, "Don't trust me. You go out and validate like the same reason I give you the slides. You go validate what I'm saying." But it's not a matter of trying to brainwash them the other way. It's getting them to ask questions about one thing I do all the time. I put the word liberal and conservative on the board somewhere early in the semester. And I ask them, point to the word conservative. Have you ever heard this word used in your educational background any time in the last 20 years in a positive sense? And they all say no. And I point to the word liberal. Can you name one instance of your 15 years of schooling where you've ever heard anyone criticize that word? No. And I just ask them, is that possible? Is it possible for any one worldview to be so unrecalcitrantly evil or to be so positively good? And even the most liberal kids, they kind of shake their head. It doesn't make sense to them. But it's the first time they've heard it. And that's the kind of stuff that I think if you give them, see, ours is an education that's big on critical thinking. One of our motto is, let's teach them not what to think, let's teach them how to think. Liberals are afraid of that. If you teach a liberal kid how to think, he's going to get rid of liberalism 80% of the time. You teach a Christian kid or a conservative kid how to think, you have to sway them. Teach them the right way. The logic and the historical truth of our worldview, that's self-evident. And that's why it doesn't take that long to blow the smoke of progressivism away. My colleagues don't like it very much. Short story, end of the story. I did manage to get tenure at UW and the University of Wisconsin system, so, oh joy, I'm stuck there. I thought, this gentleman. I'm sorry, did you have one back there? It was you. Let's give this gentleman go, we'll go right to you.
I think the problem in education verifiably started way before Common Core. I'll give an example. In California, at about a half a dozen state universities and colleges, the math professors, as distinguished from math ed professors, wondered why most of their incoming freshmen from the California system had to have remedial math. And so they started a group called Mathematically Correct. You probably have heard of it. The other side of the coin on that is a group called the National Right to Read Foundation. We got to know a lot of people through those two groups. But one of the interesting things, you talked to an old professor, Wayne Bishop. You probably know who he is. I don't even know if he's still alive now.
I don't think he is.
I know he had an accident. He started looking at the standards and forcing changes in the standards and getting rid of bad math programs. The same thing happened there, but it was like putting your finger in a bucket of water. You can get rid of, if there were 9 bad programs and 1 good, and you got rid of 8 of them, the schools would still buy the 1 bad one. Another thing, John Dewey was initially funded by the Rockefeller people back in 1894. And over about, I'd say 4 or 5 decades, if you took the value of that money and put it into, which was back in the millions then, but changed it for the inflation, I estimated that they gave about $50 billion then to undermining good education.
Yeah, and go back to where I began. I made it very clear that, going back to all these people, we didn't even mention the creation of the Department of Education, which was a huge watershed for federal takeover. But you're right, they've played a long game with us, they've spent a lot of money, and I like the way you phrase it at the end. They have been committed to undermining, not advancing, education for a long, long time. We should not be surprised that, how many aspects of progressive culture are just rolling downhill now? I mean, one question for you. And maybe this is the place to end because it's already 5 o'clock. And if you want to come up afterwards, get a business card. And thank you, first of all, thank you for being here. Could you give a quick round of applause to the Birch Society for setting this up?